Welcome everyone to Diabetes Canada's 2018 webinar series on healthy living from various cultural perspectives. My name is Farah Ismail and I'll be your host for today. We are delighted that you're able to join us today for the webinar to learn about healthy living from the African, Caribbean, and Black community. Now to start off, I'd like to draw your attention to our survey, and that's located at the top right-hand section of your screen. In order for Diabetes Canada to better serve your needs, we kindly ask that you provide us with your input by completing the short survey towards the end of the presentation, and we thank you in advance for your input. You will have the opportunity to ask questions throughout today's presentation, and that can be done by simply typing your question into the Q&A box, which is located to the bottom right-hand section of your screen, and our presenter will be happy to answer it at the end of today's presentation. Also note that you're able to customize your screen so you can expand and collapse each of the webinar pods as you see fit, so feel free to do so by dragging down the bottom right-hand corner of each webinar pod. Our presentation today will last about 40 to 45 minutes in length, and we'll have another 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions. I would like to note that today's presentation is recorded and will be made available on our Diabetes Canada website as well as our YouTube channel in the coming weeks. I would like to take a moment to thank our generous sponsors, Novo Nordisk Canada and Sanofi, who have made this webinar series possible. Now I'd like to welcome our speaker, Tameika Shaw, and thank her for joining us today. But before turning it over to Tameika, I'd like to give you a brief introduction. Tameika Shaw is a registered dietitian with the Taibu Community Health Centre in Scarborough, Ontario. For the past 10 years, she's worked with both individuals and groups to help them build healthy eating habits and make positive lifestyle changes. Tameika obtained her Bachelor of Applied Science in Nutrition and Food at Ryerson University and holds a Master's of Health Science degree in Community Nutrition from the University of Toronto. She is a member of the College of Dietitians of Ontario, Canada, Nutrition Society, and the Community Health Centre Dietitians Action Group. For more information on Tameika, please read the speaker bio section, which is located to the left of your screen. So without further ado, I present to you Tameika Shaw.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Farah, for that lovely introduction. Thank you to Diabetes Canada for inviting me to speak on this very important topic. As Farah mentioned, our topic will focus on healthy living with diabetes, and this is a focus on the African Caribbean community. To give you a brief overview of today's webinar, we will be discussing briefly what diabetes is, what lifestyle management involves. We'll be talking about some key concepts of diet, such as the glycemic index, portion control, and how those topics or those concepts relate to our traditional diets. We'll look at some sample meal plans, as well as some strategies or tools that you can use to help you with planning your meals. And then we'll switch over to some other aspects of healthy living, such as the importance of physical activity, as well as influenza vaccinations to help reduce complications. So what exactly is diabetes? And this is just a refresher for those who have been living with the condition for a while, and it may be new for those people who are just newly diagnosed. But diabetes is a metabolic disorder that usually results in a buildup of glucose, otherwise known as sugar. So sugar is the lay term that we commonly use. But it results in a buildup of glucose or sugar in the bloodstream. The medical term for such a condition is called hyperglycemia. Diabetes occurs when individuals are not able to maintain their blood sugar levels within a normal range, and that can occur for various reasons. So you may have heard someone say the comment, "My sugar is high," or "I have a touch of sugar." It's usually referring to that buildup of blood glucose or sugar in the blood. Now, diagnosis can come in different ways. One could be as part of your regular checkup or your annual physical exams, where your doctor or your provider sends you for blood work, and you come back with a fasting blood glucose or blood sugar level that's greater than 7.0. Another way of diagnosis is possibly a random or a casual blood glucose reading. This could happen through different ways. Maybe you went to a health fair or some sort of screening and you got a random blood test done, or maybe there's a day that you weren't feeling really well and you went into a clinic and again you got your blood test or your blood sugar evaluated. A random screening that's greater than 11.1 is also a sign of diabetes. There are several other ways, and the numbers are listed on your screen. The reason I'm listing these numbers is because I want you to be familiar with the numbers, be familiar with normal levels, and be familiar with what's considered a high or a low level. If you're unfamiliar with any of these numbers or any of these readings, so your fasting blood glucose levels, random blood glucose levels, a 2-hour OGTT, or an A1C, then I highly recommend that you speak to your healthcare provider. A big part of management is knowing your numbers and what they mean. So where does this blood sugar come from? That's one of the questions that I typically get from a lot of people. They'll tell me, I don't eat a lot of sweets, I don't eat a lot of sugars, I don't add sugar to my foods, so why is my blood sugar high, right? Or why do I have diabetes? How did I get it? So first, I'm going to back up and explain what that actual blood sugar or blood glucose means. Much of the food you eat usually breaks down during digestion into a product called glucose. Carbohydrate-containing foods are the ones that primarily break down into glucose. That glucose travels in your blood to all parts of your body to use as energy. That energy could be from doing something as basic to human life as breathing, fidgeting, or moving from point A to point B. But it can also refer to energy for strenuous work, such as lifting, doing exercise, gardening. Now, our body makes a hormone called insulin. That's produced by our pancreas. Pancreas helps to move that sugar from your bloodstream into your cells for use as energy. If there is any kind of defect or anything wrong with that part of the process, so either we don't release enough insulin or our cells are not accepting that insulin, the sugar tends to build up in our bloodstream, and that characterizes that high blood glucose level. Now, diabetes requires management. It requires treatment. Anything that's left untreated can lead to a host of complications. Those complications involve or include heart disease, kidney disease, issues with your eyes that could lead to blindness, stroke, nerve problems that can lead to issues with our feet, impotence, or amputation resulting from unhealed or poor wound healing that results in ulcers. And so this shows you that the complications can be quite severe, and as such, it requires management. Again, this pertains to the question that I usually get from people that tell me, I don't eat a lot of sugar, I don't eat a lot of sweets. How did I get this? There are risk factors for diabetes. Some of them are risk factors that we have control over, and some are risk factors that we unfortunately have no control over. Risk factors that we have no control over include our age. We all get older. It also includes our family history. So having a relative that has diabetes does increase our risk. Being a member of a high-risk group or population also increases our risk. Having certain chronic conditions or comorbidities such as high blood pressure, high cholesterol, PCOS are also factors that increases our risk. And then there are your modifiable risk factors. So modifiable meaning that you can change. Your diet is modifiable. It's something you can change and you have some control over. Physical activity level, your weight or central obesity. Central obesity refers to having fat deposit around your waist. Alcohol intake, and whether or not you smoke. So these are the different strategies for managing diabetes. Medication or insulin is one strategy. So some of you may already be on medication or maybe taking insulin. Managing the central obesity or managing your weight, and that can include recommended weight loss, or it might include preventing any further weight gain. Eating a healthy diet, increasing your physical activity, smoking cessation, managing your stress or finding healthy ways of coping with stress, and reducing your alcohol intake. In terms of managing your diet in the last few years has gained a negative meaning. Diet can sometimes be perceived as restriction, as omitting a host of different foods. You might be hearing good food, bad food, foods you can eat, foods you cannot eat. And so that negativity can prevent a lot of people from actually engaging in that healthy eating aspect that's needed to manage diabetes. When I speak about diet for the purposes of this presentation, I'm not referring to the food restriction. So that's a big no on limiting or restricting or being afraid of what to eat. It also does not mean binge eating or eating whatever you want. Diet for the purposes of this presentation relates to healthy, balanced diet. And so my next slides will actually demonstrate what I actually mean by healthy, balanced diet or a healthy, balanced way of eating. Now, there are many healthy eating patterns, and I'm not going to go into each of the ones listed here. They're just merely listed for those people who want to get into further information. These are healthy eating patterns that have been evaluated or have been studied, and they have been shown to have improved effects on blood sugar levels, but also shown to have improved the levels on your lipid or cardiovascular levels. Those are those levels that usually relate to blood pressure management or blood cholesterol management. So the vegetarian diet, the DASH diet, portfolio diet, Mediterranean diet, high fiber diet, low glycemic index, and the Canada's Food Guide. These are all examples of a healthy eating pattern, and if you're at all interested in any of these, feel free to look into it on your own or to meet with a registered dietitian to discuss. These are all different healthy eating patterns, which basically means you can choose one that fits your lifestyle, that fits your preference. That being said, in terms of traditional eating, and you'll see it later on, I'm showing you pictures now of those traditional dietary patterns that's usually recommended. So the DASH diet, the Mediterranean diet, and the vegetarian and vegan diet. These are just examples of those patterns in a visual perspective. And so you'll notice that a big part of the base or a big part of the recommendations are fruits and vegetables and basically plant-based foods. Fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, seeds. And a smaller emphasis is being placed on red meat, high-fat meats, as well as sweets. So how would our traditional cuisine fit? I'm going to show you two images that demonstrate Caribbean foods as well as foods commonly consumed by those of African descent. You'll see from the foods that it also matches those common dietary patterns that I just mentioned. Caribbean foods tend to be heavily plant-based, right? We eat a lot of staples, and those staples usually include your starchy fruits, your roots, your tubers, so things like plantain, banana, breadfruit, yams, sweet potatoes. But it also includes those grains, so cornmeal, or anything made with corn like hominy. It includes rice, it includes pasta. Those are staples. Now, in this image, it actually shows a larger proportion of the diet going towards staples. This is an old image. And so I am going to show you how to orient that so our diet is not so heavily on the staples, but still includes those foods that we know and we love. The diet is also heavy with vegetables and fruits, as well as those legumes. Again, you'll notice from this image that emphasis is not placed on foods from animals or the fats and oils. If you find that little pink section of the pie chart, that's the foods from animals. If you look to your bottom left of your screen, in that little yellow segment, it has fats and oils. Notice that those two proportions are smaller than the rest. This is the second image that depicts food that people from African descent usually consume. And this is courtesy of Old Ways organization, which developed this food pyramid using foods that were reported as typically consumed by people from the Caribbean, African Americans, as well as people from West Africa, particularly Nigeria and Ghana. The foods on here, again, you'll notice they're plant-based emphasis. Again, vegetables and fruits make up the bottom of the base, which shows a lot of food from that intake. You have nuts and seeds, your whole grains, and right at the very top would be where you would have your sweets and your animal protein. So you can certainly start to see that our foods and the foods that we traditionally consume can very much fit within any of those dietary patterns that I mentioned that have been heavily studied. So how do we eat in a healthy way in order to control our blood sugar? A couple of points. One is to ensure that you have consistent carbohydrate intake. To have that consistent carbohydrate intake, it will be important to know which foods contain carbohydrates. And so my future slides will show you actual images of the typical carbohydrate foods. It's also important to have meal distribution and or spacing. This basically means we should try to avoid skipping meals. So avoid going without breakfast, lunch, and eating one very large dinner. Or avoid going without eating smaller breakfast, a smaller lunch, and then eating a really big meal. If you've waited until you're too hungry, you've actually waited too late or too long, and you're more likely to overeat on whatever is inside. This can definitely cause an elevation or a rise in your blood sugar levels. Try to eat at regular times, basically. The next step would be to plan balanced meals. And I'll show you how to do that again in my future slides. Replace refined carbohydrates with a high fiber food. High fiber foods tend to be slower digesting. And so if they're slower digesting, it means that the sugar will get released much more slowly into your bloodstream, which means a more stable rise in blood sugars. And then lastly, you would like to limit your sugars and limit sweets. So pastries, puddings, cakes, anything that has like a lot of sugar added, juices, for example, even those fruit and vegetable-based juices, so carrot juice, soursop juice, beet juice, like they all start out sounding very healthy, like beets, carrots, soursop, but the minute we turn them into a juice with lots of sugar or condensed milk added, then the impact on our blood sugar will be great. These are some of our foods that contain carbohydrates. Again, when I usually ask this question, a lot of people right away will immediately tell me rice, pasta, dumpling, roti. A lot of the grains and starches are your typical foods that will contain carbohydrates that a lot of us know of. But other foods that we should consider are the tubers and roots. Yam, banana, yam, dasheen, edos, cassava, Irish potatoes, sweet potato, all those contain carbohydrates. The starchy fruits like banana, breadfruit, plantain will also contain carbohydrates. Fruits and their juices will contain carbohydrates. Milk is a big one, so milk and alternatives like yogurt, and then legumes. Legumes usually refers to dried peas and beans, so gungo peas, black beans, brown beans, kidney beans. Those will contain carbohydrates. Does it mean that we should not eat these foods? Absolutely not. Foods with little or no carbohydrates. This basically means these sets of foods will have very little effect on your blood sugar levels. So meat, poultry, eggs, fish, fats do not contain carbohydrates, so they will have no effect. Nuts and seeds have a little or small amounts of carbohydrate, but the effect on your blood sugar level is very low. Same with the non-starchy vegetables, the effect is very low. So the key to knowing these foods is that you always want to have these foods as part of your meal. Having them as part of your meal will ensure that you're having a mixed meal. So not only will you be getting the nutrients that all these different foods have to provide, but from a blood sugar perspective, it means that having a mixed meal will slow your digestion process. And so carbohydrate in the rest of the foods will break down much slower. The sugars will release much slower, and they'll get into your bloodstream at a slower rate, which means you get a gradual rise instead of a really sharp rise. Now, I spoke about the foods that contain carbohydrates. The roots, the tubers, grains, starches, fruits, milk alternatives, legumes. And I mentioned that you should still include these in your diet. They have lots of benefits, lots of nutrients, and omitting these foods from your diet can put you at risk for deficiency. So including them is a must. However, I will show you the way to include them in appropriate portions. First, you would start with the type of carbohydrate. Various carbohydrates break down differently in your body. Some break down really fast, and some are slow digesting. Those are the terms I'll use interchangeably. So slow digesting or low glycemic, and I'll say fast digesting or high glycemic. So high glycemic or glycemic index refers to the effect that a food that has carbohydrate has on your blood sugar levels. If a food is described as high glycemic, it means that it causes a sharp increase in your blood sugar levels. So on your screen, you'll see a chart that has a red line or a red shaded area. And there's a second area that's shaded yellow and has an orange line. That red or pink shaded area is referred to as a high glycemic effect. Eating foods that are heavily refined, so white rice, white flour, white bread, cornflakes, drinking something that's really sweet or has added sugar to it, those will cause that sharp increase in your blood sugar levels. That would be a no, because that usually demonstrates poor management. Your aim is to have a slow and steady increase after you've had your meal. And the best way to do that is to include those lower glycemic index foods. Low glycemic index foods or slow digesting foods generally have protein and healthy fats added. Beans, for example, are a high source of protein and a high source of fiber, even though they have carbohydrates. So the effect on your blood sugar levels from eating beans, lentils, is usually quite low. So our general recommendation is to include foods that have fiber, so vegetables, fruits, and those legumes. This is an example of how to make the switch from a high glycemic food or a fast digesting food to a low glycemic food or a slow digesting food. Cornflakes, as I mentioned, is a fast digesting food. It's very refined, it's low in fiber, and so when you eat it, it gets broken down very quickly into glucose. Switch your cornflakes in the morning or any kind of low fiber cereal that you might have, or if you tend to have a high sugar cereal, switch that in the morning to something that's like a whole grain, oats or hominy. Those are common whole grain choices. The key to making sure that that oats or that porridge remains in a healthy choice is to limit the amount of added sugar. Whether you tend to add sugar or condensed milk, limit the amount that's added. Start out by tasting or measuring how much sugar or how much sweetener you usually add. Once you've figured out that number, start to cut the amount in half or try to go with 0. Use other spices to flavor your porridges. Spices like cinnamon, vanilla, nutmeg, they add a lot of flavor without you really needing a lot of sweeteners. Switch in, let's say, a fried and overly ripe or heavy ripe plantain to boiled half-ripe plantain. That's a switch. It allows you to keep the same food in, but the preparation method is different, and so you're able to lower the effect on your blood sugar in that method. Switching from white bread to whole grain bread. Everything that I'm telling you so far, those are key messages that I want you to take away, and I want you to start to evaluate and reflect if there are certain lifestyle or certain habits that you have right now that could use changes. And if there are, start thinking about making some personal goals. These are some other examples of low glycemic or high fiber foods. So again, I mentioned the fruits and the vegetables. Fruits, if they're the whole fruits, because they have the fiber intact, and so the digestion is slower. Vegetables for sure. The legumes and lentils I've mentioned before. Some of your starchy tubers and some of your starchy fruits like the yam, the banana, plantain, nuts and seeds. Foods that are usually made from these ingredients. So for example, kenki or fufu, if made from low glycemic carbohydrates, will usually retain their glycemic index value. Now, how would you incorporate these in terms of your meals? how would you really start to put the individual foods together on your plate to make a meal? I have a visual here that shows a plate. Start with a 9-inch plate and visually divide that plate into half. Half of your plate, your aim is to fill that with vegetables, at least 2 kinds of vegetables. The vegetables that I'm referring to are those non-starchy vegetables. So your aim is to fill half your plate with the vegetables. The other half of your plate, again, visually divided, and fill a quarter of that plate with the low glycemic or high fiber grains and starches we just discussed. And then your other quarter of that plate, fill with lean protein. So fish, chicken without the skin, beans or lentils, lean meat, meaning that any visible fat has been trimmed off, so goat or beef or pork, try to go for the leaner cuts. Add in a fruit and a glass of low-fat milk or unsweetened soy beverage can help to round out your meal. If you're doing plant-based beverages, it is important that you read your food label to choose the unsweetened variety. This is an example of a meal that follows the plate method. So on the left side of your screen, there's a plate that has some roti, some rice, and chicken. This does not fit the plate method at all, and so this would be a meal that's heavy in carbohydrates. On your right of the screen, this is a more balanced plate. So the rice and the roti, I'm hoping you're able to see that really clearly. I just realized you're not able to still see the rice as much, but the rice is still there, it's just less. So we've cut the amount of rice, taken out one piece of roti. The chicken is still there, but we've now added some okra and a bit of salad, half cup of each, right? So we've basically made a switch. It includes the same foods, just in different proportions. And that's how I want you to start to rethink your plate. Look at what you can take some off and add more vegetables. If you start your plate by adding half of that plate vegetables, you're more likely to fill less of the plate with a carbohydrate food. This is another example of a healthy plate, courtesy of the Institute of Family of Health. On one half of your plate, again, we've got some greens. On the other half, we've divided that with some jollof rice, and it looks like a mackerel stew. Another example of a plate, again divided into half. Some rice and peas on one quarter of the plate. Looks like brown stew chicken in another quarter of the plate. And then we've actually added some healthy fats here. So feel free to add a little bit of avocado on your plate or pear, depending on the name that you call it. Do a quarter of it. Adding some healthy fats can also help to slow the breakdown of carbohydrates. Now, in terms of portions, I do get these questions a lot, like what is a portion? From my point of view, that plate method is like the easiest way or the simplified way of ensuring that you're getting balanced eating, and that you're not overdoing it, right? Filling that plate with half your vegetables. The only drawback or barrier that I tend to see would be the availability of vegetables. If it's a matter of meal planning, I usually encourage people to rethink this. When you're thinking of what's for dinner or what's for lunch, start by thinking what vegetables I will have. This is another goal-setting area. Start to think of veggies. If you're making a pot of veggies, try to make a big pot so you have leftovers for at least 2 or 3 servings. Try to keep different vegetables on hand as well. Keep some frozen ones that have no sauce or salt added for a quick fix. Maybe some frozen okras or some frozen broccoli, just to pull out quickly and steam so that you have it available for your plate. In terms of a serving size, if you actually want to get into the measurements of it, there are 2 ways that you can do it. Using actual cup measurements, so using a half cup or 1 cup measurement that you have at home, or also using what's called the handy guide. So it's looking or using your hands to help you visualize the portion sizes. But generally speaking, your aim is to have at least 2 servings of vegetables or 2 different types of vegetables on your plate. 1 serving is equivalent to half cup or a quarter of your plate, or it's the same as saying half fist. If they're cooked and raw, your aim is for half cup. For leafy green vegetables, your aim is to have 1 cup, so you're looking at 2 handfuls. Now the leafy greens, it seems like more, and it's because greens are loose, they're leafy, they take up a lot more room. Whereas a cooked vegetable will actually tend to shrink. So if you think of spinach, spinach is loose, it's leafy, it's green, same as callaloo or kale. Whenever you start to cook, they shrink almost to nothing. And so because of that, if they're raw leafy vegetables, you want to add more to your bowl or to your plate. One whole fruit is usually equivalent to a serving. If your fruits are cut up, so for example papaya or plantain or melons, then your aim is to have about half a cup. Try to have fruits as part of your snack or even as dessert after a meal. So if you feel like having something sweet, go for fruits instead of something that's traditionally more sweet or traditionally higher fat. So something like a pudding or cakes. You want to limit those as much as you can. So if you do get that sweet craving or you feel like having dessert after a meal, go for desserts that are fruit based or just having some cut up fruit. Starchy vegetables, what's a serving? Again, try to stick portions to 1/4 of your plate, but if you are interested in having a serving, it's a half cup. That's usually or typically 1/3 of a plantain or half of a green banana or a slice of yam or cassava that's equivalent to about half of your fist, like half of your closed fist. 1 slice of bread or half of a bagel is 1 serving. Rotis or chapatis or any type of flatbread, half of a roti or half of a chapati is 1 serving. So you're looking at a piece that's about the size of the palm of your hand. Dumpling, kenki, or banku, 1 small dumpling or 1 small piece around the size of the middle of your hand. Pasta, the equivalent is a half cup, and it's about half a fist. Again, all these foods, you should try to make them fit on 1/4 of your plate. Serving size of porridge is equivalent to 3/4 of a cup, or almost a cup. That's 1 fist. Serving size of rice is equivalent to half cup or half your fist. One cup of milk is usually 1 serving, or 3/4 cups of yogurt is 1 serving. Again, try to include these as snacks or as part of your meals because they are lower glycemic, which means they do not give a big effect on your blood sugar levels. And so having them as part of your meal creates a mixed meal, so you're better able to have stable blood sugar levels. Other examples of milk and alternatives are cheese, evaporated milk. Now, evaporated milk is the concentrated form. So instead of 1 cup of evaporated milk, you're looking at a half cup of evaporated milk. And for those who use powdered milk, you're looking at about 1/3 cup of powdered milk. That can be added, let's say, to porridges, for example, like reconstituted and added to porridge. For meat and alternatives, again, your aim is to choose those that are leaner. So chicken without the skin, fish cooked in lean ways, so trying to avoid fried fish. Aim for fish that's been steamed or baked or roasted with very little fat added. If it's meat, again, try to cut or trim fat off and try to go for cuts of meat that have terms like loin, so pork tenderloin or beef tenderloin. Those tend to have lower, or eye of round, those tend to have leaner cuts or lower amounts of fat. Adding nut butters and nuts and seeds to your meals and to your snacks can also help. They're a good source of protein and other nutrients, of course, good source of healthy fats as well. But they can certainly help to add balance to your meal. So if you're having a slice of bread, instead of having plain bread or plain crackers on its own, add some peanut butter, right? Instead of having, let's say, a fruit on its own, try to add some nuts or some seeds. A small handful, like a small cupped hand, gives you a serving. Go for unsalted seeds. We know salted tastes really, really good, but you want to go for unsalted seeds. So a lot of the recommendation again is just to try to make sure that we're lowering our salt intake and we're not aggravating any other conditions that might exist. So in terms of blood pressure management, a low salt or low sodium diet is really recommended. Adding peas and beans can really help to lower the glycemic index or the sugar response in a meal. So rice and peas dishes or rice and beans dishes are really good dishes to include. Having soups or stews made with beans are also great to include. So in general, for food preparation, you're looking at choosing cooking methods that limit the amount of fat, sugar, and salt. In terms of lowering the amount of fat, try to choose foods or dishes that are boiled. So again, I mentioned the soups and the stews. Try to cook meats in stewed form versus fried form. If stewing, it's not necessary to add a lot of oil. You can add a little bit of oil just to do your saute of your vegetables, and then for the rest of it, add water or broth for the stews. And again, you can feel free to add a little bit of oil, so a tablespoon of oil just to drizzle over your meat or to coat your pan, and then you put it in the oven. So fat is not bad, it's just the amount that we add. So in terms of frying, or if we have to bread and batter, so for example making fried chicken, it becomes the amount of the oil. Try to limit the use of unhealthy fats. So unhealthy fats usually refer to fats like lard, palm oil, butter, or at least limiting the amount of use in cooking. Limit foods that tend to have hidden fats. So again, the pastries or the fried snack foods. So plantain chips or banana chips, fried dumplings, puff. Those are all snacks, traditional stuff that we love, but those become occasional foods. Use a lot of spices, herbs for flavor. Try to use a lot of those fragrant vegetables like garlic and onion for flavor, and that way we get to limit or avoid using salt. Read your seasoning packages to see if there's salt added. A lot of the seasoning packages don't mention salt in the name, but if you read the ingredient list, it can list salt as an ingredient. Avoid or limit your use of salted or pickled meats, so salt fish or salt beef, salted crayfish. Try to limit or avoid. Use the fresh version of the kind. Use fresh beef if you're making soups or stews. Use fresh cod if you're making a codfish dish or you're making ackee and saltfish. This is an example of a sample meal plan. The focus here is the Caribbean diet. So for breakfast, for example, one of those whole grain porridges that I mentioned, so you could have a 3/4 cups of oats or hominy porridge made with low-fat milk or unsweetened plant beverage like an unsweetened soy milk or soy beverage. Add some protein, so 1 or 2 boiled eggs depending on your appetite. Add 1 whole fruit, for example 1 tangerine. Add 1 cup of tea that's unsweetened, or if you like, 1 cup of coffee with maybe some milk added, but again unsweetened. Lunch, half of a 10-inch roti or half of a 10-inch chapati. Again, you're adding some protein, so 3 ounces or 1/4 of your plate chicken. And then on the half of your plate, you're going to have some vegetables. Your option is to have a salad, so lettuce, cabbage, carrots, or you can have some steamed vegetables. If you're going with a salad, and if it's a coleslaw, try to go with a more vinaigrette-based coleslaw as opposed to a creamy coleslaw dressing. Snacks are always optional. The snacks will be determined based on your goals, whether or not you are participating in physical activity, depending on your medication or insulin. Feel free to discuss your snacks with your dietitian or your healthcare provider. But an example of a snack here would be 1/2 cup of fruit, so a 1/2 cup of pawpaw or papaya, and a 1/4 cup of unsalted mixed nuts. Dinner is again that half plate method. And a 1/4 of your plate, then we'll start with some boiled plantain, boiled green banana, 1 medium steamed fish, and then having 1 cup or half plate of greens. Add some healthy fats such as an avocado as a quick boost of healthy fats. And again, a snack before bedtime or after is also optional because again, it's dependent on your medication, whether or not you take insulin. Also depending on the time that you had dinner or the space in between your meals. This is an example of a meal plan from a West African diet. Breakfast again can be oats porridge or oatmeal made with milk, 1 to 2 boiled eggs, also add in a fruit and some unsweetened tea. Lunch, half cup brown rice or any dish that's made with brown rice. So for example, if it's jollof rice, try to use brown rice instead of white rice. If it's rice and peas, try to use brown rice instead of white rice. 3 ounces or a quarter of your plate chicken, also no skin, baked or stewed. And then again, also making sure that you have some salad with an oil-based dressing. Snack, some unsalted mixed nuts, and half a banana. In dinner, a quarter of your plate is again starch, right? So a quarter of your plate fufu or kenki with a quarter plate of mackerel or fish stew. On the other half of your plate, 1 cup of steamed greens or okra, basically any of the non-starchy vegetables of your choice. Snack again is optional and for the reasons that I listed before. But here we've got an example of 4 whole grain crackers. And then we've added in some cheese for some protein and a cup of milk or unsweetened plant beverage. Again, you're mixing your meals. So you're using that plate method portion and just making sure that you're choosing foods from the different food groups to put your meals together. That's what we usually mean by balance. So the key takeaway points, making sure that you have consistent carbohydrate intake, and this comes from avoiding meal skipping. Space your meals out, trying to eat at regular times, putting the meals together using the plate method like I showed you, and choosing foods from the different food groups, replacing any kind of refined carbohydrate or high sugar carbohydrate food with a high fiber carbohydrate food. Try to limit your sugars and sweets. Limit those unhealthy fats. Choose foods that have a lot more healthier fats, and then limit your salt that's added. Some other aspects of healthy living, because we could not leave and not review this again, is to know what I call your ABCs. Those numbers that I mentioned at the beginning of the slide, so your A1C, your fasting blood glucose levels, but also knowing your blood pressure and your cholesterol levels. It's a good part of management because it helps you lower your risk of heart attack and stroke. And so sit with your healthcare team or your healthcare provider and know what your numbers are and set a target for either lowering or for improving those numbers. And incorporate some physical activity, of course. Choose activities that you love. If you like to dance, then put on some soca music, put on some reggae music, and move, right? Join a group class, call a friend, join a mall walking group, look to your local community health centers or community centers for any group activities that they have that you can participate in. If it's something that you enjoy, you're more likely to put some effort into it. The benefits of physical activity are endless, but it also includes improved blood glucose control, helps you maintain any weight that you've lost, helps you improve mood, and it also helps you to improve your cholesterol levels and as well as your blood pressure levels. If you're just starting out, what we recommend is that you start slowly. You might want to get the go-ahead from your doctor, of course, or from your healthcare provider, but start slowly. Start with 5 to 10 minutes per day. And then as the days go on or the weeks go on, you start to increase the amount. You might start to do 3 bursts of activities per day. So 3 short sessions lasting 10 minutes each. You might start to set a routine for that. So getting up early in the morning and going for that walk or going for a walk after your meals. Once you've established that routine and it becomes part of your habit, it does become easier. As you find your fitness level increasing, you can start to progress to longer walks or longer bouts of activity. So 30 minutes a day, anywhere up to 50 minutes a day, and then trying to do that for at least 5 days per week. Any activity counts. You bring your heart rate up a little bit, it really helps. Brisk walking or walking at a moderate pace, dancing, like I mentioned, to any kind of music, join in a group exercise class like soca size or reggae aerobics, Bolly Fit. Those are just some examples. Makes it fun. Zumba is another one that I forgot to mention. Just any of those group classes makes it fun, and makes it doesn't seem so much like that hard work or exercise that you need to dread. Also, feel free to include some resistance training and some yoga a couple times a week. So yoga or any kind of stretching would usually help. So rounding out those 3 types of activity, resistance, stretching, and some cardio, trying to do that 5 to 7 days a week is really the recommendation that you should be aiming for. So again, if you are not doing any of these, start with anything that I've mentioned here and start to set some personal goals for yourself. Starting with 10 minutes a day is a goal that you can set for yourself, and then you gradually build on. Managing your health in terms of reducing flu-related complications, that's a big one. Adults and children living with diabetes are actually at higher risk of contracting influenza-related complications and are also at risk for increased hospitalizations. People with diabetes who received a flu vaccine saw a 70% reduction in the rate of hospitalization for influenza, pneumonia, and other acute respiratory diseases, as well as heart attack, congestive heart failure, and stroke or diabetes events. This is from a Dutch case study of adults living with diabetes. And so it's recommended not only for you guys to get the vaccine, but also for caregivers and close contacts. People who come into close contact with people living with diabetes are also recommended to get their flu shot. And this is where I turn it back over to Farah for questions. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate your attention.
Thank you so much, Tameika. You've provided us with an absolute excellent presentation today on how to lead a healthy lifestyle from the perspective of the African, Caribbean, Black community. I do want to take another moment again to thank our generous sponsors, Novo Nordisk Canada and Sanofi, who have made our webinar series possible. So as Tameika had mentioned, we will move on to questions now. I haven't seen too many come in, so folks, don't feel too shy. Send us your questions, and Tameika will be happy to respond to them. With that being said, Tameika, I will start us off with our first question here. One of our participants has said that there seems to be a large need to have a lot of vegetables on a daily basis. So is there some examples you can provide us as to how we can get our portions in for the day?
Okay, so I'll go back to the plate method. General recommendation, or usually when you hear references to fruits and vegetables, they're usually combined, and it sounds like a big number if somebody says eat 8 servings, if you've ever heard that. And so what I generally tell people is to break it up into 2, see them as 2 separate groups, fruits, and then there's vegetables. Following that plate method that I mentioned of having 2 servings of vegetables on your plate, right, or having 2 different types of vegetables on your plate, that half of your plate is equivalent to 2 servings. And if you aim to do that at lunch and dinner, half your plate, you're now at 4 servings. So having 2 servings at lunch, 2 servings at dinner, you've now reached your 4 servings for the day. If your recommendation or if your target is to have 5 servings per day, then I would recommend that you have another serving as a snack. So following that plate method, before you think about it like that, it seems like a lot, but following that plate method does allow you to have at least 4 for the whole day, and then add in, let's say, a snack of, carrots or cucumbers, celery, as part of your snack. That adds your 5th. I hope that answers the question.
Great. Thanks so much, Tameika. Our next participant has said that there's been a really great use of visuals for our portion sizes, but they're wondering how they can account for or cater for sauces and gravies.
Right. So using the healthy preparation methods that I've mentioned, so boiling or stewing, or even baking. If you're doing a stew that doesn't have a lot of oil, you can certainly add a drizzle of gravy over your rice or over your protein if that's what you desire. It's if the food is heavily fried, that's when you really need to track your portions, because The recommendation against sauces or gravies is because they're high fat, or they have a tendency in the past to be high fat. If you prep your meals or your foods using one of those healthier prep methods, any gravy or any juice or drippings that's produced tends to be lower fat. If you're using leaner cuts of meat as well, the sauces and the gravies produced from that should also be lower in fat.
Great. Thank you for that, Tameika. Our next participant has asked if there's any recommendation around alcohol consumption.
Well, my biggest thing would be to tell you, if you have not started drinking, or if you're not a drinking, or if you don't drink alcohol, I would recommend that you don't start. For those people who do, general recommendation is to limit your number of drinks to 1 drink per day for women and 2 drinks per day for men. If you're drinking more than 3 drinks per day, then I would recommend that you set a goal towards reducing the amount. But your aim is to go for to little or no alcohol. And if you are choosing alcohol, try to choose one that has some kind of benefit. For example, red wine. So maybe drinking a glass of red wine instead. Or you might try to go for those alcoholic beverages that don't have a lot of carbohydrates in them. So for example, a fruity pina colada or strawberry daiquiri will have a lot of carbohydrates because it does have the alcohol, but it also has the juices mixed in. Now, given the 1 drink per day for women and 2 drink per day for women, I am still going to say that if your diabetes is not under control, I would recommend stopping or working on not adding any alcohol at all.
Great. Thank you for that, Tameika. Our next participant has asked if you have any general recommendations around eating out.
Certainly, because social life will continue. And so eating out, I know, is like a big part of it. Whether you're going to a restaurant or you're having a family gathering, chances are you are going to be in an environment where you have not prepared the food yourself, and so you have no control over what's available to be selected. So in terms of eating out at a family-style event, I will use family or workplace. If it's a potluck or if it's an instance where you're able to bring a dish, I recommend bringing something that you know is part of your healthy eating plan. Now, if it's a situation where you're not able to bring a dish and you are eating out, try to go for dishes that have a lot of vegetables based. Try to start in the areas where the vegetables are. So if this is a buffet style setting, fill your plate with whatever vegetable options are available. Fill it with half. And then you proceed to the rest of the offerings by choosing your protein, your starch. It still helps to divide your plate into half. If you are at a sit-down or seated service or at a restaurant and you're ordering from a menu, again, order those dishes that primarily have a lot of vegetables in it. If you're ordering a protein, look for certain keywords, words that indicate that they have been cooked in a healthier way. So baked, steamed, stir-fries usually indicate less fat added. Any food that has the words breaded or crispy or buttered usually indicate any kind of it usually indicate a higher fat food.
Great, thank you so much for that.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say.
No, go ahead.
The restaurant. It's just if you have a choice, go to those restaurants that are able to prepare the food while you're waiting, and that way you can actually customize your menu choice. You can ask for less things to be added, so less sugar to be added, less salt to be added. When your food comes, look at the portions. Maybe right away ask for some of it ask for a takeout bag or a doggy bag or a container and start to share that. If it's dessert time and you still want to taste a little piece, I recommend sharing a dessert so you're not eating a whole piece by yourself.
Great. Thanks for that, Tameika. Folks, we have a couple minutes left, so I'll just take a couple more questions, but do apologize in advance if we haven't gotten to your question, but please feel free to email us at webinars@diabetes.ca for any questions or concerns, or if you'd like any more additional resources, feel free to send us a note and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. So Tameika, our next question here is from an individual who has a bit of a sweet tooth, and they're wondering how would you suggest them to manage a sweet tooth, and when would be a good time to allow themselves a treat, like in terms of frequency?
All right. So sweet treats, definitely they're occasional food. So your aim is 1 time or less per week. But if you are having something sweet, I highly recommend having it as part of a mixed meal. Have it with your meal. So again, um, your digestion is slower. Plus, you're more likely to eat less if you're eating a meal, just because you're going to be more full, right? You're more likely to be satisfied. I also recommend sharing, as I said before, sharing a piece of cake or muffin or something with someone usually means that you can enjoy a piece without eating the whole thing by yourself. If you're going for desserts, try to do a lot more fruit-based desserts, like apple crisp, for example, or any kind of fruit crisp. They have the fruits. They usually have whole grains, like a oats topping, and then limiting the amount of sugar that's usually added to the topping. If you're
Great, thanks.
exercising or into activity, if you're into activity, then I recommend also exercising after, right? That allows your body to use up some of those blood sugar levels.
Actually, that's a great segue into our next question, Tameika. An individual has asked, how long do you wait to exercise after you consume food?
As long as it's not something very strenuous, if you're going for a moderate walk, you can actually go right after. However, if you're doing something very vigorous that requires, let's say, running or jumping, you would probably want to wait 1 hour before, just because you can also get some digestive or some gastrointestinal upset if you've gone too soon after. So I would say judge that based on the level of activity that you will be doing and what you had to eat. So something light or moderate, you can go really right after.
Great. And our last question here for today's webinar, Tameika, is what would you recommend to be a good sample or a good example of a nighttime snack? Would a glass of low-fat milk and protein suffice, or would you have other recommendations?
That sounds really good, actually. A glass of low-fat milk, high-fiber cereal, a protein choice, some nuts, a boiled egg. All of those options sound really good. But again, in terms of snacking, it depends on your goals. It depends on your medication. And so that's, to get more specific into that I would recommend working through a meal plan with your registered dietitian.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Tameika. And folks, that does conclude our webinar for today. I do want to remind everyone that today's webinar is recorded and will be made available on our Diabetes Canada website as well as our YouTube page. And if there are questions that we didn't get to today, we do apologize, but please feel free to email us at webinars@diabetes.ca, and we'll be happy to get back to you as soon as possible. I'd like to sincerely thank Tameika for speaking on behalf of Diabetes Canada, as it's been a really great learning experience. So thanks, folks, for participating today. I do want to let you know of our upcoming webinars happening over the next 2 weeks. On October 4th, we'll be doing something similar as today's webinar, but from the South Asian perspective. And again, on October 9th, we'll have a webinar from the lens of the Indigenous perspective. For those of you looking for more support and resources to live well with diabetes, please feel free to call our toll-free line at 1-800-BANTING, which is 1-800-226-8464. We hope that you've enjoyed learning today with Diabetes Canada, and we look forward to your participation in the future. Thank you.